Hello, everyone. I'd like to welcome you to another episode of Conversations about Art. My name is Alan Constant. I live in Albuquerque, New Mexico, and I'm here with Paul Rowland, who lives right outside of Tokyo, Japan. This morning, we're going to be talking to Oliver Lunn. Oliver is a mixed media artist from London, England. So, welcome, Oliver. Glad to have you join us.
Hey, thanks so much for having me. I'm really honored to be here with you guys, and thanks for asking me.
Great. Before we take a look at work at your images, I just want to ask you how you got involved in art. Did you go to school or what got you to where you are now?
Yeah, I'm not really from an art family per se. I just I just sort of fell into it. I didn't really know what else to do when I was younger, and I just had seen a few paintings, and that kind of excited me, and was always drawing and things. And eventually, I went to uni. I did study art, and painting was sort of my area. And I was really into kind of minimal painting, and I liked the idea that you had to be drawn into a piece, so maybe you couldn't quite see it, and it was very ambiguous, and then you got closer, and there was this sort of like surprising moment where you were like, "Oh, what's this?" And I always loved getting really close up to paintings and experiencing them in person. So that was kind of the paintings I was making, and then further down the line, I moved to London, small flat. Collage was kind of came into the picture by necessity because it was kind of smaller. And so like I approached collage kind of like painting and was trying to basically make little paintings but using paper. And then that sort of grew and grew and eventually I wanted to go back to painting but use the collages as a kind of basis for painting. And to cut a long story short, my new paintings are kind of based on small collages and trying to blow up these ideas I had. So, I mean, you've seen a few of my collages and the kind of like chaos of it all. I wanted to blow up and try and make it have that same feeling on a bigger scale. And that's kind of where I'm at today. I'm still trying to do that.
When you say that you start with small collages and blow them up, you don't start with a small piece and then try to blow it up in Photoshop or anything, but you just start with larger collages, correct?
Yeah, that's it. I always looked at these small collages and I loved them, but I was like, I wonder if I can have a bigger version of this. I'd love to see this as a painting on a much bigger scale.
Yeah.
And that was kind of the problem because materials are so small. Like if you have magazines and you're cutting them up, and I love all these little details, but I can never find anything big enough to make a sort of large scale version of it. So I would have to like prep a lot of materials and paint paper and try and be more expansive. Um, but yeah, it's a real struggle to try and recreate something on a bigger scale. So I'm always searching for imagery that is slightly bigger and posters in the street are always good because you have slightly larger fragments of things, so you can make bigger collages. But the paint really helps kind of create space as well, which is obviously something I'm also really interested in, and like how space can create a sort of drama and tension in a piece. But yeah, like I said, it's a real struggle, and I'm still trying to figure that out. But the search for that is kind of what keeps me going, and it's really fun.
And also, if I'm not mistaken, you interview other artists, kind of like what we do. Is that correct?
Yeah, yeah, actually, that's kind of it's been about a year of speaking to other artists and like just discovering loads of people.
Okay, great. Well, let's take a look at some of your work now. So this is the first image we're going to talk about. And when I look at it, there is so much going on in this image and so many aspects of it that I really feel drawn to. One aspect is the title. I think we want to start with that. I think it's called Can't Keep from Falling Up the Stairs. Is that right?
Yeah, that's right.
Where do your titles come from?
Just everyday stuff. I collect a lot of sort of words in my phone and sort of when I'm out walking, things come to me and I quite like comical titles and references to dancing and movement. But this one, I think it's called "Can't Stop Falling Up the Stairs," is kind of is something I always do. I always trip up stairs, and I don't know if it's because one of my feet is bigger than the other. My wife always laughs at me, but every stairs I always trip up, and it's kind of like the opposite of falling down the stairs. I just I always just think about it's kind of funny. So
I know Paul's going to ask about this later, but do you also write poetry? Because your titles are very poetic.
I don't, but I'm interested in kind of like really short sentences and kind of approaching them as little collages as well, and the way words sort of feel and the shape of words and the roundness of some words I'm kind of interested in. And yeah, they're almost like extensions of the collages sometimes. I sometimes think about them like that. So, and they're also, I like to use them as a way to soften the kind of maybe the seriousness of the work. Like it can make it more comical and, add an element that's a bit softer, perhaps, because sometimes they seem a bit austere, my work. I don't, maybe that's just me, but not sure.
As I said earlier, there's so much going on in here. So my first question is, how long does something like this take to make? Because it looks like just a lot went into it.
Yeah, I would say it's so funny because I think some of these smaller pieces take way longer than the big pieces, and I sort of fuss over them for a long time. And there's so many details and layering that I almost have to step back, and I'm like, this is too much, and it's so chaotic. And the sort of final stages of these smaller pieces are kind of like quieting the piece and finding space and trying to like discover a composition and tighten certain bits and that's like the editing bit is kind of like the hardest bit, but I would say this probably took about a month, probably, like coming back to it. So yeah, quite a long time for a small piece.
And how large is this piece?
It's a little square. It's actually on a hardback book cover. I want to say it's about this big. So sort of
Uh,
a little bit smaller than a vinyl record.
to be honest, I thought it was huge. I thought we were talking about 36 by 36 or something, you know.
Oh, I'm glad. Yeah, and actually, I was really happy with this piece, and I kind of had that feeling of like, I wish it was a big painting. Like, I'd love to stand in front of a painting that's like this and had that kind of quiet chaos and lots of things to explore, like a sort of puzzle piece. I kind of get excited by a lot of small details, but also it kind of becomes a problem because I get so captivated by the granular elements that I lose sight of the bigger piece and the total effect of a work. So I'm kind of that's what I'm trying to focus on now is like how to sort of tighten a piece to sort of draw your eye into various corners and pockets to like really enjoy the smaller details.
I think it was kind of big because it looks similar to work I've seen by other artists who do large work. Because it looks like there's a lot of, as you said, there's a lot of layering, and it looks like there's scraping. Do you use scraping?
Yes, I use I think for this piece, this is about a few years old now, but I definitely used sandpaper, sort of yeah, scraping and peeling off as well. So when you peel graphical elements off, you get a slightly more fragmented and scuffed up aesthetic. And I really like that kind of ambiguity.
Yeah.
I never wanted anything to be sort of clear to sort of make you work a bit harder as a spectator. I find that kind of cool. And I think I always try to approach collage as painting rather than
Mm.
get sort of hung up on traditional notions of collage, like you say. I mean, you could really do anything with it. There's so many methods and approaches. Like, there's no reason why you have to use a scalpel and like cut stuff up and carefully place it together. It's like you could really do anything, and why not approach it as if you were making a sculpture or a painting? You'd probably come up with something way more interesting than if you just thought about it as collage.
So, do you do any painting on these or not?
These ones, these older, smaller ones, I didn't. I definitely used crayon. Like I can see some pencil marks. And some of the color actually comes from sticking on a very old image and then peeling it off, and the trace, it's a trace of the color rather than a sort of direct coloring on, which I do still use that technique a lot. So it's kind of like stealing the color from parts of images and transferring it on. So it's kind of slightly softer as well. That's kind of partly the reason for the muted colors. it sort of deadens it when you transfer. So yeah, that's kind of a technique I just discovered by chance, but it's another good one to use.
I have to tell you, I think one of my favorite parts is what you wrote towards the bottom. Oh, oh, oh. It's like it feels so spontaneous. It's such a great little expression that feels very human and very down to earth.
Yeah, I think a lot of those things I write on myself probably just come from random musical elements that I listen to a lot of music when I'm making, and I kind of like little bits of lyrics catch my attention and interrupt me and find their way into the pieces. And it's probably like something from a doo-wop song or something. It looks like something you might hear in a 50s doo-wop song, probably. But yeah, lyrics and stuff definitely find their way into my work. And you probably see lots of text in my pieces too, which is kind of a consistent interest.
So, Oliver, that leads me into asking you about music and the relationship between music and your art. Because I noticed on your Instagram you had like a Spotify playlist. There's lyrics in there. This one actually reminds me a bit of like a kind of really like rough punk Kandinsky or something. Like someone's like ripped up a Kandinsky and stuck it back together. What's the relationship between music and art for you?
I think, yeah, it's probably bigger than I even know because music always came first for me. I was always making music and art at the same time, so they kind of bleed into each other. But I say like probably more jazz, and it sounds like a cliche, but jazz definitely excited me creatively because it's just, everything's kind of crossing over each other and it's exciting and it feels visual in some ways. But yeah, also the musicality of visual elements I'm interested in. Like I think every piece kind of has a rhythm to it, and there's like a maybe a jagged, angular thing going on in this piece. So I like to think I approach it musically as well, and again that maybe goes to my sort of unorthodox approach to collage. It's like trying to think of it as something more than just paper. It's kind of musical and rhythmic, and but I always want it to feel integrated at the same time. So a lot of these sort of disparate elements will kind of overlap and sort of join in places. Like you can see some lines sort of line up, and I don't know, there's something sort of harmonic about that as well. Like I'm trying to find a unity somewhere. So yeah, it's hard to explain that side of it.
Now, I really like all these crossovers, just between collage and painting and drawing in there. But also, you mentioned like movement and dance, and the way your eyes are drawn around it as well is it kind of almost like an improvisation. I feel like I'm creating something as I look at it. So that's quite exciting. And I just wondered when you display these, I mean, in a quiet gallery somewhere, does that sort of go against what you're trying to do, or would you like to play music there? Like, what would be your ideal sort of conditions for displaying your work?
Yeah, I think I really like the idea of just a really quiet room, to be honest. Like, so you can really hone in your senses. So a lot of space, a lot of calm, sort of, quiet around the piece. So simply just on a white wall where you could just approach it and sort of cancel everything else out so you can penetrate it and get lost in it. There's something really beautiful about walking into a gallery and seeing something that just sparks your intrigue and walking up to it is just, yeah, I get really excited by that. It doesn't take much, just a white wall and a pop of color that you can sort of walk towards and enjoy. But I do think space is important. So I don't know, playing music might be a bit too overwhelming because it could sort of interrupt that experience. But the music sort of comes before in the creative process for me, I think.
This piece is called When Using Phil's Gated Reverb. Oh, so this is another title referring to music.
Yeah. Yeah, that's right. It's actually I was listening to a lot of Phil Collins. I know a lot of people hate Phil Collins, but a lot of that 80s sound, he was famous for this gated reverb, which is sort of this reverb that cuts off and it's like this suction sound. So that famous drum solo on I forget the name of the song, but it's a very famous drum transition, and it's got this sort of suction sound. And I was kind of fascinated reading about that. And again, like I sort of write a lot of this stuff down. I'm quite nerdy with music, but I like the texture of that and the specificity. So I wanted to kind of bring that into my work somehow. And there's a lot of references to things like feedback and reverb, and I'm not sure why. I'm just interested in music as a visual thing as well. So texture, and this piece is definitely more about texture and sort of the influence of walls and sort of bringing elements together. So it is a collage, but it looks like a painting. There's a lot of paint and mixed media in it, but it's basically a sewn together canvas from different paintings I've done. And I want to say there's one, two, three, four different works that have been sewn together, and a lot of layering, a lot of paper, and a lot of paint.
And this is another small piece, book size.
No, this is bigger. I would say this is maybe just under a meter.
What did you use as your substrate on it?
So it's a stretcher. It's a chunky stretcher, and it's just a raw canvas. And I would work on the floor though off the stretcher, so I'd have a lot of resistance on the floor, so you can really work into it and build layers. And I use a kind of thick wallpaper paste, so I can kind of try and find my way back to the former layers. So there's a lot of like push and pull in that process.
So this is more of a painting than it is a collage. It looks like there are a little bit of collage elements in it.
Yeah, I would say, I mean, I don't know, to be honest. I used a lot of paper. I would, I mean, I'd probably call it a painting, but I kind of approached it as a collage because I was sewing different fragments together. So the final piece is this sort of sectioned collage, which is why you see these hard lines. On the left, there's a sort of margin, and the top little rectangular section is from a different canvas. So all those kind of painting, there's this collage element in how I bring it together, but also there is actually a lot of paper. You can see like some tearing in the bottom bit, and yeah, there was a lot of sort of pulling painted paper off the surface and leaving this sort of speckly pattern, I guess you call it. But yeah, it's really paint and paper. So mixed media is probably the best way to look at it.
So you said you put four pieces together. Did you attach them using glue or some other method?
Just a sewn, like so a sewing machine was the way I just pulled it all together. I laid it out in this very simple composition and just sort of ran the machine through it to really pull it tight. And then I re-stretched it back onto a stretcher.
That's funny. I've been thinking about getting a sewing machine. I'm not sure what I wanted to do with it, but it's like, but I mend my own clothes. My wife doesn't do it. So if I need to patch a hole, I just do it myself. So I've done that for years. I thought a sewing machine would be kind of fun to play with, but
Yeah, they're so fun. And it really means like you can just keep adding bits on and create this sort of Frankenstein piece. Like the sky's the limit. Like you can just grab something here, something there, and just expand it. So that was the kind of idea. When you have a small studio space, it's quite good being able to fold stuff up and pile things up. And if you want to work big, you can just sort of, sew things together and then roll it up, and it's not a problem.
that's great. Let's move to the next one. This is called Goober Blues. The blues because there's so much blue in it.
Yeah, I kind of wanted to keep this one really stripped down and just it was again like a sewn together painting from different fragments of raw canvas, and it was all like blue drawing, so I used only tools that were blue for the most part. There is a bit of green in there actually, but I would do large drawings on the floor, and then eventually I found some fragments that I liked, and it's normally just parts of paintings that I like or parts of drawings, so I could carefully choose and frame those sections. I was like, I just love this section rather than the whole thing. So it was a really nice way to sort of edit out the bits I didn't want and create this new whole out of that. And yeah, it's a lot of fun. So I could just choose like a pop of chaos, and then you see these sort of empty spaces on the right, which do have very faint marks on. And yeah, it was all about editing really this piece, but the blue was just something I wanted to just keep a piece that was really simple and just had a sort of simple mood to it, I guess, rather than add too many elements as I've done in the past.
Oliver, this one and the last one really remind me of like, weathered, worn walls in a city, and this one is maybe, I don't know, forgive me, but like an old desk in a nursery or a school that someone's been scribbling on. I really love that aspect of your work. It's kind of like discarded, overlooked spaces or surfaces, but you're focusing on them. So it's like the marginalia of the world, like the stuff that people ignore, you're focusing on. And I really love that. What draws you to these kinds of surfaces and textures?
Yeah, I think that's a really beautiful description actually, and definitely mentioning the child's desk thing got me thinking about defacement, and I think I've always been fascinated about kind of messing stuff up and like things that aren't supposed to be there. And that's the whole thing with kind of graffiti, I guess, and old walls and like how things change over time and they're not what they once were. So definitely the kind of marginal, scuffed up elements that are in the environment always fascinate me. And definitely like walking down the street, I'm always taking pictures of walls and marks. And I think ambiguity, just like as a sort of baseline, is something that really fascinates me. And I don't really know why. And I think that's why I'm compelled to explore it because it doesn't, it's not clear why it sort of creates this feeling in me. But yeah, it's hard to explain. It's just what excites my eyes, really. It's definitely like the overlooked, I suppose, like you said as well. There's something intriguing about these sort of marks we leave behind and traces of things and yeah, it's hard to sort of you know analyze why I'm drawn to it, but I'm sure there's a reason.
I know exactly what you mean. And you taking photos of, these surfaces as you go down the street reminds me of, what I do and what Alan does in photography a lot as well. I'm sure we'd probably stop at lots of the same places. And on your website, you have a whole section called palimpsest. And I've always loved that word since I discovered it as well. And the idea of all of those layers and the history of maybe just ordinary people, that the traces they've left behind. It's just fascinating, isn't it? Yeah, I can't pinpoint why it's so fascinating, but I really love that aspect of your work.
Oh, thanks. I think it might be just the history of it and this kind of passage of time and how that kind of gets recorded in a surface. I think that's super interesting and something oddly poetic about it, even though it's very like, you could just walk past it and it's kind of maybe nothing, but it's something really beautiful and layered and it's a sort of trace and echo of something that's happened. It's yeah, I guess poetic is sort of a better way to look at it. Yeah, I think scale is definitely, I mean, with this piece, this is a lot bigger than the ones. I think it's over a meter, like it's a lot bigger. So a lot of information also gets lost in a small image like this. There's a lot of marks that you kind of, I guess, have to see in person, which is something that really interests me as a maker, like the idea of making something that kind of has to have an aura that goes beyond a photograph, as and it's very hard to photograph work that is subtle as well, which is a whole other thing, I suppose.
Okay, let's move to the next one. This piece is called Ditch the Click Track. Where did that title come from?
Again, another like musical production reference, I suppose. It's click track in music where everything is sort of hangs tightly on this click track. And I guess there's something liberating about the idea of ditching it all together and just letting everything hang loose. And there's kind of like this loose humming rhythm. Yeah, I was definitely thinking musically again about this piece, and the blue again has this overall tone I wanted to capture. So I think in terms of like composing it as a song, there's this hum under it that has a feeling, and then all these interesting like textures and sounds that come into it. So I guess it's sort of a way of me trying to create a sort of ambience in a visual painting, if that makes any sense at all.
Absolutely. And even in this one, where maybe there's more color and texture than in some of your other pieces, you've still got this like this soft colors. I think you described it elsewhere as like the a muted palette. Not pastel, that's not right, but it's like this sort of like um it's like there's a veil in front of it, or yeah, these ghostly colors, which is really calming, and creates this, yeah, just really, it's like ambient music, it's ambient visual music. Why is that so appealing to you? Like, are you trying to create a particular mood? Like, where does that muted color palette come from?
I think I never really liked work that sort of shouted at me. Like I never responded to art that was like trying to grab my attention. Like I didn't want to make anything attention grabbing. So I always thought the best way to sort of have impact is to sort of whisper and make people get closer so they can hear it, you know? So it's all about these small quiet details and colors that you have to work a little bit to get any sort of impact or reward from. Because I think everything else in the world is sort of like screaming for your attention, and there's something more radical about going the other way and kind of appreciating quieter moments and smaller details. And I think that's kind of a fundamental in all my work, really, when I think about it.
I really like that. Um, especially in the world we live in now. Good God. Um, what kind of responses do people have then? Do you find that their reactions are perhaps different to they'd have to other work? You know, you're drawing them in, you're not grabbing people by the throats. What kind of responses do people usually have?
Yeah, I don't know. I mean, it's just probably not for everyone. I'm sure, like, I hear a lot of nice things, I suppose, but yeah, I don't know. I think people do mention the colors again, they like it, but I think they miss a lot of the small details, maybe. Like when they see it in real life, they're always like, oh, I had no idea, it was this sort of layered. And like when they view it from the side and they see things sticking off, and there's hopefully an element of surprise too. It's not just a sort of flat surface.
I do feel a little bit frustrated looking at these on my screen, actually. Maybe more so than with some other artists. I just can't. I know I'm missing something, and it is a bit frustrating. So it's quite interesting to hear you talk about it. Almost you're giving me the 3D tour that I don't have.
Yeah, and this piece is very probably one of the more textured ones. There's a lot of paper and it was quite heavy. And then I worked back into it so many times, so it feels quite aggressive compared to some of the pieces. So there's a lot of crayon and defacement happening in there. So definitely the like wall element was a inspiration in this. Like I wanted it to feel like a wall with a lot of history and stories and
So I'm glad Paul brought up the idea that you use muted colors because when I look at your work as a whole, that's the most distinctive thing about your work until you go into each individual pieces and start to see the elements that make them up. It just seems like you're kind of forging your own path in the art world because everything is so bright and saturated. And it's actually, like Paul said, it's a very calming, welcome change, from the other art that we see.
a lot of that happens towards the end of me making a piece when I think about it now, like looking at this piece, the color kind of happened quite early on, and towards the end there's a lot of covering things up. But like there's a lot of paper over the top of paint and oil, and then sanding over the paper so you could sort of see other elements under it. Because when I layer stuff, I get quite frustrated if I put something on top but you can't quite see what happened before. So there's always trying to find a way to show the other layers. So if on the left you sort of see a faint trace of a graphic, I think it was part of a letter, and I actually reverse I glued it down on the wrong side, so it was a bit fainter, but you could still see it. And yeah, so this piece definitely I wanted those traces, and the colors were definitely at the sort of in the early stages of the piece. But then I didn't want to totally erase them, so I kind of very carefully, strategically placed them and covered them, and I eventually got to this point where I was happy with the amount of color and it not being too much, and it's a bit of a fine dance sometimes.
To me, the strongest element of this piece is the composition, and especially the diagonal line. When you start a piece like this, do you have an idea in mind of what you're trying to do, or do you just let the piece evolve on its own?
Yeah, definitely the latter. And I actually think composition is sort of my weak point. So I've recently been really trying to think more about how to kind of lead the eye a bit more so it doesn't just all hit you at once. Like I want to have a sort of journey as a viewer and be led, with arrows and things and lines, and so you can really move around it and have this experience. But this one, yeah, definitely feels more striking as a composition because of those hard lines. And they were actually, I tried to only use like the edges of paper as a way of creating those lines. So when I would stick things down, I would strategically place them and then work around them. And eventually, like this definitely happened gradually. I never set out with this composition. It just sort of ended up here, and I was happy with it at a certain point.
Oliver, you mentioned earlier that the titles were meant to maybe like take the edge off a little bit, maybe the seriousness that you perceived in them. But I don't know, this is subjective, of course, but the color, the shapes, the clear joy that you must have had in creating it, um, intriguing elements like just a random word. I love the arrow here and the glimpses of things. Playful is not quite the right word, or it's not everything, but there's an experimentation. There's a joy here. Why do you say serious? And like, are you trying to do something? Like, I know there's not a message behind it, but I'm just intrigued by your choice of that word.
Yeah, I think it's more me being anxious about a perceived seriousness in the work, which I don't feel personally, but I think because there is this stripped down color palette and maybe a lot of empty space, they could be perceived as these kind of like austere things or a bit sort of, I don't know, maybe sort of serious. And I didn't really want that. So the titles were almost a way to reclaim what I saw as something that was quite joyful and playful and just yeah, really just having fun with it, which is, at the root of it is all about fun. Like I wouldn't do it otherwise. So yeah, even this piece, like this was a lot of fun to sort of create glimpses, as you say. I like that word of like glimpses of details, as if you're sort of peering around a corner and you just see a slight part of something, and you want to turn your head and peer around the corner. And yeah, that's kind of why I use these framing devices like you see in this piece, where the hard lines are. It's a way of covering up and kind of like you want to know what's behind there, but you can't, I like the feeling of wanting to peel paper off to see what's underneath. And it's sort of this sort of secretive element that's hiding and but being maybe a bit cheeky with it as well. So trying to get away from seriousness and being more honest about the joy and play within it and the cheeky side of it.
I wanted to ask you about like erasure and adding. Like, how does that work? You said you were covering up, but also you're peeling away. Does one of those stages happen first, or is it you're just adding and then you tear stuff off at the end, or are you doing it as you go along? How does that work? That kind of to and fro.
Yeah, I mean, I realized actually talking to someone else about this, it's definitely a huge part of what I do is just constantly erasing and taking away. But I guess yeah, that does come later. Like when I start a piece, it's just building up and not being too precious, but it's just adding and then subtracting, taking things off, and it's constantly going forwards and backwards and forwards and backwards, and it's all chaos really until like the final stages where it's some sort of fine tuning happening. But erasure, yeah, it's definitely a huge part of what I do because I also attack the piece quite a lot. That's although they're quite subtle and soft, like there's maybe this sort of more tactile, aggressive side of it where I'm attacking the piece with a knife or scalpel, or I'm trying to erase certain bits that I don't want in there. So it's kind of just again editing out the parts I don't want, but that's a lot of it. So what you're left with is just like sort of carefully selected bits, if you like.
It's almost like you're weathering it, like you're doing all the business that the city might do, but just within the confines of your studio. You're like a one man weather system.
Yeah, it's really hard. I do think about that and how to sort of speed up that process that does happen outside. And I'm always experimenting with different techniques and processes, trying to find a way to sort of weather, if you like, paper or sort of take some of the intensity out of it in terms of the color and the details. And water, I found, is really good for that. A lot of water can sort of attack or ruin papers and stuff. But every paper is different, so just so many variables that it's constant experimentation to try and so yeah, recreate what happens out in the world. But you never quite get that, and it becomes its own thing. So which I'm also happy about.
The more time I spend with this, the more colorful it gets. It's like my eyes are allowed to adjust. And it's like they're adjusting to, a darkened room. And the colors are kind of bright by themselves. They're emerging rather than leaping out at me. It's like a very subtle meal or something like that. I'm not attacked by it. It's just gradually coming out, or like a piece of music that you might have to listen to a few times before it grows on you. I really appreciate that.
Oh, I love that. Thank you. And it's funny because a lot of people used to say to me, "Oh, why do you hate color?" Or oh, color's not really a big thing in your work, which I love that you picked up on because I strip it down so much. I always think maybe I'm not a colorist, but I do love how they work on the smaller pops of color and how yeah, it doesn't give it to you straight away. It's sort of you have to work a bit and then it reveals itself and spend time with it and the color starts to appear and you see it differently. But I do like the idea, again, maybe it's quite cheeky, of having something that looks like nothing or looks like it's just one color and then slowly it starts to reveal itself and it's a bit of a surprise and maybe there's something fun in a weird way about that, at least to me.
Oh, wow. Boy, I love the grid on this one. So was this premeditated or did the grid just come up in the evolution of the work?
Yeah, I'm trying to remember. I think I was just trying different things, and I think the idea was to layer bits of paper and then sort of cut into it and see how much of the underneath would reveal itself. And if I literally just placed a painted sheet of paper over the top of the whole thing, carve this grid into it, and sort of see what would happen. And I think I wasn't satisfied with it for a long time, so I kind of had to hack into it and sort of create some more interesting marks because I was never quite satisfied with just a grid. So I wanted the grid to be quite subtle and have other elements that could sort of cross over lines and not be so rigid because it didn't feel too sort of stiff because I am drawn to like the grid in art, but I want it to feel quite loose and human at the same time. And I like the idea of sort of a sense of things breaking down within structures. So like having the structure, I could sort of break it down and make it more human and natural. And again, just play with color while doing that as well. So little pops here and there and bits of text.
Again, I find, as with all your pieces, there's a lot of room to move in your pieces visually and mentally. I just keep exploring different parts of the painting. It's like walking into a room with a lot of interesting objects in it and wanting to take them all in. Almost like a child exploring the world for the first time, and everything has a sense of wonder.
Yeah, I love that, and it's kind of what I want from a work of art as well. Like I want to feel that when I look at a piece of art, where there's more to it than meets the eye. It's not what you see is what you get. It's like what else is there underneath this? Is you get hints of it, but you never get the whole thing. And intrigue is sort of yeah part of that game. And I wanna feel it when I look at my own work too. It's like kind of because I forget what's underneath a lot of these. Like I can see a bit of a graphic hiding underneath there, and when it's 2 or 3 years later, I almost want to peel off bits and try and remember what there was underneath there. So yeah, I want to keep myself excited and on my toes even as a maker.
This is called by way of the boom bap. Again, another musical reference, I assume.
Yeah, and I think actually this is maybe had a grid in it somewhere. You can see a lot of hard lines. I was listening to a lot of rap music from the 90s and this sort of boom bap era, and the idea of like beats, but also sort of off time. And I wanted to create something that sort of had a hint of a structure, but also had sort of been decayed or fragmented. So you had this kind of more um, abstract rhythm, abstract kind of beat. And yeah, it's quite blocky, I suppose, this piece, but quite quite childlike too. And yeah, there was a lot of covering up again, and just the composition came at the very end in terms of like how color worked in certain areas, certain pockets. And so I was kind of thinking like composing by color, I think a lot with this one, where a certain color worked, and then placement of other colors around that corner, the red and the blue, and sort of yeah, I think there was a lot going on earlier on in this piece, and then I just had to strip it right back. And yeah, it's funny how it comes together at the end, and you finally are happy with it. But yeah, I'm happy with this one.
Yeah, I feel this owes something maybe to like clay or even Mondrian. So it's interesting to say you were kind of composing with color. I love these little, it's like a patchwork quilt. It's like tiles. It's like rugs. I lived in Morocco and I remember there being layers of rugs in some people's houses. And also reminds me of like a children's game somehow, like with the little tiles or something. And that's what the grid ones reminded me of as well, like maybe a snakes and ladders board or a chessboard or something. And when you said, maybe composition wasn't your strong suit, I'm not in any position to judge, but I love the fact that there is no like obvious center. I'm not drawn to any particular uh, place or section, that I am allowed to wander around. And maybe game or puzzle is a nice metaphor for that because I feel like I'm playing and I want to stand here in a gallery looking at it and pointing out various things, to a friend and kind of like moving from this area to this area, almost like a game piece might move around. I just, yeah, it's really reminding me of my childhood and things that kids love to manipulate and play with. It's very tactile. I want to touch it.
Thanks. Yeah, and I definitely I think why I said composition was not my strong suit is because I never really wanted to have a focal point. So it was always really hard for me to sort of think of it as like, okay, where is the way in? And sometimes it would be, the brightest color, and it's like, where does that lead you next? And that's sort of more about how I think about composition rather than having a center to the piece or a focal point that everyone's eye starts there and goes here. So yeah, I like to view work as a sort of loose dance. And yeah, definitely the gamification of that or looking at it like a puzzle is quite interesting. because I much prefer the idea that everyone's experience is different and you sort of move around it and don't quite know where to go. But I don't know, maybe you might enjoy a little bit of it here and there.
Maybe that's the frustration that some people may have, that there is no one way to view it, and that it is entirely open to interpretation. So you have to do a little bit more work. Like you said, you have to, really kind of like lean into it, and then it will get you. Like you said, like with a whisper. Yeah, but you have to give it a bit more attention, maybe.
Yeah, definitely. I mean, that's how I like to view art. So hopefully some people are willing to look a bit longer. I'm sure some people will just walk right past it because it doesn't grab them, but that's also totally fine.
On this piece, I notice in some of your past pieces, you're not afraid of wide, empty spaces. And again, I see this in the bottom. And if we're talking about music, it's almost like, quiet or space in music.
Yeah, I think resting is definitely a good word as well because it's very easy to get overwhelmed, especially when I'm working. There's a lot of detail and it's quite chaotic, and I'm always like, this is just too much, and I'm always looking to kind of find a device to sort of reframe it and give a bit of breathing space. So it's definitely a conscious way of creating drama and maybe suspense too, because before, like, I couldn't quite enjoy certain details because there was just too much. So it was a way of like focusing your eye onto the interesting details. But yeah, I think I do that more and more now because I always want that sort of drama, I guess, and resting and breathing space is a good way of looking at it, I think.
And let's go to the last piece in a spreadsheet somewhere. Your titles make me want to laugh because I don't fully understand them, but they're so fun.
Thank you. Yeah, and this one's quite chaotic as well. And I think, I mean, the idea of spreadsheets is so mind-numbingly dull. So I quite like that contrast of, something that is quite playful and about defacement. And, it is that thing of like a child just being bored and attacking their textbook. I quite like the idea of textbooks as a surface to work on. I sometimes have paintings that I'm never quite satisfied with, and it's really nice to be at that point where you can just attack it again and have fun. It is a collage as well. You can see a lot of paper in it. It was it was fun to just attack this piece, and it's maybe less subtle than some of the other ones we've looked at, but again, like just using a stripped back color palette was also a way of controlling that chaos because there's so much happening that it was quite overwhelming. So instead of using space to sort of take off some of that intensity, I used a simple green color palette with a few pops of color.
I was going to ask about the green because that's the most obvious element in this piece.
Yeah, the green, I guess I definitely found some green paint in the street, so it was kind of happenstance that I had this big pot of green that I used a lot. But green definitely as a color, I don't know what it is. I love green. I was thinking a lot about blue and green, and I think there is a jazz song called Blue and Green that I was thinking about, or Green and Blue. And for whatever reason, I just wanted to explore green and blue as a sort of dominant mood because it has such a strong feeling. But yeah, again, it was also a way of trying to tame the piece and sort of whip it into some kind of consistent piece.
For me, this feels gloriously unfinished, in contrast to some of the others that feel a bit calmer and settled. But at the same time, of course, it's finished. I can't imagine that you would do anything else. But how do you ever know that something like this is finished? Do you ask somebody else? Do you leave it? Do you just get fed up and bored with it? How do you know?
I mean, the idea of unfinished is really interesting, actually, and maybe if it looks unfinished, then it's finished in a weird way. Because I always liked things that look like you want to jump in and keep it going, and that you see the potential in something, but you also have to have quite a sort of strict discipline to not overwork it, because then it goes back to that phase of like, oh, it's too finished maybe. But I think I am drawn to stuff that looks traditionally unfinished, and I want to see the potential in it where you want to like add more maybe. But how do I know when it's finished? Uh, I'm not entirely sure. It's just sometimes a feeling and having the guts to sort of put it aside and be like, oh, I think this is it. But I think every artist struggles with that because especially in abstract work, it's really it is hard to know. But sometimes it's putting it aside for a while and seeing how you feel about it. But this one, yeah, I think I was just happy that it looked unfinished as you describe it.
Well, speaking of finishes, we need to bring this conversation to a close. But I want to thank you so much. I've seen your work on Instagram, of course, but to take a deeper dive, that's the whole point of these conversations. Instead of just swiping and looking at a piece for 2 or 3 seconds, we get a chance to really look at your work and dive into it and spend some time with it. And I really appreciate everything you had to say about your work.
Well, thank you so much for having me. And yeah, it's been really fun for me as well to just look back at some older work and see how I feel about it and try and put it into words, which isn't always easy with art, is it?
Well, thank you so much, Oliver. We appreciate your time.
Thank you.